The next piece of data we want to look at is response times. How long is it taking us to get from the fire station to the call? And we identify that we had 5,000 bona fide fires. Okay? Of that 5,000 fires, we look at the response times for each of those fires, and we come up with some general statistics. For example, we can say that our average response time to each one of those fires was, say, 8 minutes and 15 seconds. Okay? That was our average response time from the moment the call was received to the moment the first apparatus on scene. Okay? Very important. Not the time, not the time it was dispatched, the time the call was received to the time that the first apparatus arrives on scene. We look at that, and our average is 8 minutes and 15 seconds. Not too bad for, especially, like I said, a community covers 100 square miles. I haven't even given you the demographics of the department here. We'll just say it's an average sized department and it's meeting its needs. You know, it could be better. Obviously, that always could be improved, but that's not a really bad number when you consider they have some long response times. But an average of 8 minutes and 15 seconds from the time the call is received to the time the first apparatus arrives at scene. We know that the national standard, that where they want us to be, is in that 4 to 6 minute in the urban settings, and anywhere 6 to 8 in the suburban. And we have really good data on that. It's provided not only from the National Fire Protection Agency, but it also is listed in NFPA 1710 and 1720. All right, so we can pull this information up. And this is the accepted standard for ISO. We hear a lot about that lately, but the Insurance Institute, the Safety Organization, Insurance Services Organization, states that this is the minimum response time for them to give you adequate ratings. Okay, so we look at the response time, very important. We are obviously here, we are above where we want to be. Okay, so we have to improve that because that affects this. It affects insurance rates paid for by your citizens. So we need to look at improving our response times. Another statistic or a piece of information that we want to have to put into this equation is we want to look at total fire loss data. We had 5,000 structure fires. Well, in certain circumstances, certain communities, 5,000 structure fires might spur action by the community, either the manager, city manager, or the county commission to do, more to prevent those fires. However, if they turn around and they say, well, what was the cost of those fires? And you say, well, we put most of the fires out and there was very limited cost. We're estimating the cost, of those 5,000 fires to be less than $1 million. And I'm asking you to spend $6 million on increasing our fire protection services. Obviously, that equation doesn't add up. Okay? So, fire loss data is important because if I'm going to ask them to give me, let's just throw that number back out there, if I'm going to ask them to give me $6 million for a budget, to add or increase in $6 million to my budget, and my fire loss is $600 million, then I think that's a valid expenditure if the overall goal is reducing that. And I have to make sure that when I spend this money, it's going to have an impact on that. Okay? So I need to do what I can to bring that down to a manageable number. So fire loss data is very important. Now, I've been giving you a lot of information here and I'm spewing it out, and we're talking about administration of a fire department. But I want to include the fact that when you're a company officer, all of this is contributory. What you do as a company officer contributes to these statistics. For example, when you're doing your NIFRS report and you go to a fire call, there's that fire loss damage and that data information down the bottom. How much was it valued before the fire? How much was it valued after the fire? All that information that you populate in those fields is where the National Fire Protection Association gets this. That's where your fire agency is going to get that data. So if you put nothing in there, if you go to a room and contents fire and you don't fill it out properly and you don't put any numbers in that particular area, then your fire department's not going to get any credit for having preserved the dollar value of the property, or it's not going to get any credit for the total dollar loss as a result of that fire. So it's important as a company officer that you understand the need to provide that information in your fire report, because that's where that information gets put into and populates spreadsheets that we can use to get more equipment, bring in more bodies, more staffing, and get essential items of protective clothing or protective equipment that we might need. So understand that your role as a fire captain, your role as a lieutenant, your role as whatever your role is in the fire service, you impact the bigger picture in everything that you do, or some cases fail to do. Another key component of fire loss data, and this is the really big one that you really can't put a dollar and cents value on, but this is the really big one, is you have to look at fire loss data as it relates to death and injury. Okay? If your community has a high fire death rate in comparison to other areas across the country, then you need to look at taking measures to reduce that. And if you, same token, if you have a high fire injury rate, you want to do whatever you possibly can to reduce that. Now, there's a number of ways we can address that. First of all, through fire public education. Okay. Another aspect is through prevention. That would be, inspections, investigations, company officer walkthroughs, things like that. And then, of course, the final area that you can reduce that death is improved response. And getting there faster and being able to put more equipment on the ground in that area, in a short period of time, to be able to get there before it becomes a fatal fire. So again, these are areas that you can reduce, and not just death. The same thing applies for injury as well. But again, the biggest impact is the death, because that's a fire loss that cannot be replaced. There's no dollar value you can put on a life. So we have to look at it and reduce the chances of somebody dying in fire. And we do that by looking at education, preventing it through inspection and investigation, and then improving our response times. Another component of strategic planning, and this is for all kinds of organizations, but we've basically adopted it in the fire service as well, is looking at your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. They call it a SWOT analysis, okay? So we look at this and we say, what are our strengths? Well, our strengths are, our strengths may be in fire suppression. We have, a relatively low fire rate, relatively low fire death rate, fire loss dollar rate is low. We're able to get our apparatus on scene in a reasonable period of time, in a percentage that we need to be there. So we have a good strength in that respect. Our weaknesses may be in our ability to provide the added services, such as special operations. All right, so we may need some better work in that area. So we look at that as a weakness. Now, strengths and weaknesses are generally internal. There's something that we look at within inside the agency. There's something that we can identify and we can deal with. Opportunities and threats, on the other hand, are not necessarily within the organization. They're probably more external. Okay, internal threats we can deal with, internally, and they're not necessarily something that we're going to have to spend a lot of time on. But threats coming from outside the community, for example, in today's day and age, one of the biggest threats you have is terrorism. Okay, so we have to deal with that, and you can't necessarily predict it, and you can't predict the impact of it. Opportunities, okay? Opportunities might be, to raise money through grants. Opportunities may be to merge or consolidate services or consolidate. And so those all are opportunities that we can improve our business or improve our department through increasing revenue or increasing our ability to do our job. So these are your strategic plan is going to take that into account. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are potential opportunities that are opening up to me? And what are the threats? What can we be facing? And you look at that and you take each one of those and you add that into the factor of what you need to do your job. And you can apply the same thing to specific components of what we've just done. For example, as a suppression. You can do the same thing in EMS. You could say, well, what are my strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats in EMS? And you can do the same thing to fire prevention. What are my strengths in fire prevention, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And you can apply this to each one of those areas and look and determine where you need to improve.